The sun was beating down on my backyard, the pool glimmering like a perfect oasis of peace. It was supposed to be a simple summer day, relaxing, tranquil, the kind where everything just feels right. But then she showed up, Mrs. Lisa Johnson, HOA Karen, with her clipboard in hand, her smug face hiding a storm of entitlement. And just like that, my peaceful paradise was about to be shattered by her. You see, Karen didn't just knock on my door. No, she stormed in like a bull in a china shop, trying to take control of my property, threatening me with fines for a pool that was literally perfect. She walked in, telling me how my backyard violated the HOA rules, and before I could even process what was happening, she gave me 48 hours to tear it down. 48 hours. I stood there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This pool, this beautiful, expensive, and perfectly legal pool I'd built over years of hard work. She wanted to take it from me. But that was just the beginning. What Karen didn't realize was that this wasn't just about a pool. This was about my rights, my property, and the sheer audacity of someone thinking they could push me around without consequence. That day, I made a choice. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I decided that I would make her pay for every single fine she tried to impose. What happened next? Well, let's just say Karen found out the hard way that messing with the wrong person can cost you everything. Karen wasn't just any HOA board member. She was the president. So to her, the HOA rules were her personal playbook. She loved making life difficult for anyone who didn't bow down to her version of order. Over the years, she'd made a name for herself by throwing around rules that no one even knew existed. I had heard the whispers, stories of neighbors being fined for ridiculous things, like having the wrong type of fence or flowers that didn't meet her standards. But when she knocked on my door and made her demand about my pool, that was the breaking point. I wasn't just some homeowner who would roll over. No, I had spent every penny I had to build the perfect backyard. This pool wasn't just for me. It was for my family, my friends, and my sanity. This was my piece of the world, and Karen thought she could just waltz in and destroy it with a couple of threats? Not happening. I couldn't believe it, but I wasn't going to let her win. No way. The second I closed the door behind her, the wheels started turning. I began to gather everything I could: photos, paperwork, receipts, the blueprints of my property. I knew I needed to build a case. I wasn't just going to fight Karen. I was going to destroy her case. She had no idea what she had just started. The next few days were a blur of frustration and determination. I spent hours going over every little detail. I researched HOA rules, property codes, and even consulted a lawyer. Karen thought she was the one holding all the cards, but I was about to turn the tables. She wanted to mess with my property? Fine. Let's see how she likes it when I start digging into her records. As I worked, I couldn't help but think about how absurd it all was. This wasn't just a pool, it was the principle. How dare she tell me how to live on my own land? How could she be so entitled to think she could make demands like this? And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Karen was about to get a dose of her own medicine. I had everything in place, ready to fight back. And when the day came, I walked into that HOA meeting with everything I needed to shut her down. Karen thought she was in control, but little did she know. She was about to find out how wrong she was. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not without a fight. When I showed up to the HOA meeting, I was armed with facts, evidence, and the confidence that Karen had seriously underestimated me. The entire room went silent as I presented my case. Every fine, every rule, every ridiculous thing she had tried to pin on me. I wasn't just going to defend my pool. I was going to tear her case apart. And that's exactly what I did. I kept my cool, kept presenting the evidence. And when it was all said and done, Karen was left speechless. The fines were dismissed, and I was awarded damages for the emotional distress she caused. The best part, Karen had to pay for every single fine she tried to throw at me. She thought she could come into my life and take my hard-earned property. And in the end, she ended up with nothing. Her whole world came crashing down because she didn't know who she was dealing with. In that moment, I realized just how satisfying it is to stand up for what's right, and how powerful it is to take control of your own fate. I've learned a lot from that experience, and one thing's for sure: If you ever find yourself in a situation where someone, especially an HOA Karen, thinks they can push you around, don't back down. Fight back with everything you've got, because sometimes the only thing standing between you and justice is the courage to stand up and say no. And for Karen, well, she learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone who knows their rights. Not only did she lose the case, but she also lost the respect of everyone in the neighborhood. It was a small victory, but one that felt a whole lot bigger. I got my pool, I got my peace, and most importantly, I got my victory. The next few weeks after the HOA meeting were oddly quiet, and for a moment, I thought Karen might have learned her lesson. But the calm was short-lived. One day, as I was having lunch on my patio, enjoying the peace of my backyard once again, I saw her. There she was, marching toward my house, clipboard in hand, and that same entitled look on her face. She had the audacity to think she could walk into my life again without consequences. I stood up, feeling the familiar surge of anger boil inside me. How dare she? She had already lost, yet there she was, still trying to disrupt my life. I didn't even wait for her to knock before I opened the door and faced her head-on. Her eyes widened as she saw me standing there, my arms crossed, a confident smile on my face. She didn't skip a beat. "You're not finished with this, are you?" she said, as if she had every right to come back. "I'm not done making sure this neighborhood stays in order." This time, I didn't play by her rules. I didn't need to. I had already won once, and now I had the upper hand. I let out a slow breath, just enough to make her realize that I wasn't intimidated by her anymore. "You've already lost, Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And every time you come back, you just make it worse for yourself." I could see the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She thought she could push me around and get away with it. But now, she knew better. Her attempts to get under my skin were futile. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. But Karen wasn't the only one who was about to be surprised. The real twist came when I received an unexpected letter a few days later. It was from my lawyer, and as I opened it, my heart sank. It wasn't just another fine or a complaint from the HOA. It was a lawsuit Karen had filed against me for emotional distress caused by my refusal to comply with her requests. The nerve. She was trying to sue me for something I didn't even do. I laughed. The audacity of it all was almost comical. But underneath that laugh, I could feel the old anger start to rise again. She thought she could intimidate me with a lawsuit? She didn't realize I had the perfect weapon, the truth. I wasn't just going to let her win again. This time, I was going to make sure Karen learned the consequences of picking the wrong fight. I immediately gathered my lawyer and started strategizing my next move. I was ready for whatever Karen threw my way. The day of the court hearing arrived, and as I sat there, I could feel the weight of the situation. Karen was on the opposite side, looking smug as usual. Her lawyer tried to paint me as the villain, claiming that I had been unreasonable in my response to her demands. But I wasn't the one who had started this. She had walked into my life, demanded that I tear down my pool, and when that didn't work, she had tried to drag me through court with false accusations. One by one, my lawyer presented the facts, photos of the property, the official documents that showed my pool met all code regulations, and even a few neighbors who were more than happy to testify about Karen's bullying tactics over the years. By the time the judge called for a recess, it was clear who was winning. When the court resumed, Karen's lawyer had no defense. The judge was not impressed by her baseless claims. In the end, Karen lost. The lawsuit was thrown out, and not only that, Karen had to pay for my legal fees as well. As I walked out of that courtroom, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of victory. Karen had underestimated me at every turn, but I had fought back every step of the way, and I had won. The news of Karen's defeat spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and it wasn't long before the other residents came forward with their own stories of how Karen had made their lives miserable over the years. It turned out she wasn't just a nuisance to me. She had been bullying other homeowners for as long as anyone could remember. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the neighborhood queen anymore. She had lost her grip on the HOA, and people began to rally against her, calling for change. It felt like the neighborhood had finally taken back control, and it was all thanks to the fight I had put up. Even better, Karen seemed to disappear from the scene. No more complaints, no more lawsuits. She had been defeated, and the community was finally free of her reign of terror. Looking back, I realized how much I had learned through this entire ordeal. It wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about knowing my rights, not letting anyone intimidate me, and refusing to back down when someone tried to mess with what was mine. The next few weeks were an unusual kind of quiet. No more fines, no more complaints. It almost felt like Karen had vanished from my life entirely, as if she was never really there. I was finally enjoying the peace and tranquility that I had worked so hard for. The pool was still there, my sanctuary, and everything seemed right again. Or so I thought. One evening, I was out in the backyard, sipping on a cold drink and admiring the calm waters of the pool when I noticed something strange. A black car pulled up to the curb in front of my house. The engine turned off, but no one got out. I squinted, trying to make out who it was, but the windows were tinted too dark. As I watched, the car stayed parked there for a few minutes, almost as if it was waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized what was happening. This wasn't just some random car. This had to be Karen, or at least someone she had sent. It seemed too coincidental for it to be anything else. I didn't know what she was planning, but I sure wasn't going to let her make another move. Not after everything that had happened. I walked inside and grabbed my phone, dialing my lawyer. If Karen was up to something again, I wasn't going to let her catch me off guard. My lawyer assured me he would be on standby, just in case. I wasn't sure if this car was just a coincidence, but I wasn't about to take chances. As I hung up, I felt a pit form in my stomach. I had gotten used to the idea that things were finally calm, but I realized Karen wasn't the type to let things slide. She had more tricks up her sleeve than I'd ever guessed, and now I could feel the storm coming again. The next morning, I received a strange letter. It was from a property management company, and it looked official. The letter claimed that a new HOA violation had been filed against me, specifically regarding the construction of my pool. The letter was vague but threatening. It said the pool didn't comply with certain architectural guidelines, and if I didn't make changes, I would be facing hefty fines. I was furious. How could this be happening again? I opened the envelope, my mind racing. I read the letter twice, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. There it was, buried in the fine print. The property management company was connected to Karen. She was at it again. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to find another way to get me. And this time she had brought in a third party to do her dirty work. I took a deep breath and called my lawyer again. He didn't waste any time. "We'll need to dig into this property management company and figure out what they're up to," he said, his voice calm but determined. "But I think we have a pretty solid case already." I knew I had to stay one step ahead of Karen. But this time, I wasn't just going to fight her on my own. I was going to bring the full force of the law down on her and her shady associates. The game had just changed, and I wasn't backing down now. Days passed, and my lawyer began gathering information on the property management company. It turned out they had a shady reputation, with a history of manipulating HOA rules to line their pockets. They had connections all over town, but they didn't have the kind of evidence that could take me down. The more we dug, the more we uncovered. Karen had pulled every string she could find to attack me again, but I wasn't going to let her win. She had already underestimated me once, and she was about to make the same mistake again. The letter was just the beginning. What she didn't realize was that I had more than just evidence on my side. I had the power of truth, and that's something no one can ignore. By the time we were ready to move, the pressure was on. Karen was trying to hold on to whatever little bit of control she had left, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew she was losing. This time, there would be no victory for her. It was my turn to finally end this. She had pushed me to the edge once, but now I was coming after her with everything I had. And this time, I wasn't backing down. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, and Karen was sitting there with a smug look on her face. She thought she had won again. She was confident that this time she could bury me under her threats and lies. But she didn't know what was coming. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn to speak. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had witnessed this whole ordeal. Some were Karen's allies, but others, Others had seen the truth. And that was exactly what I needed. When my lawyer called for a break, I stood up, ready to deliver the final blow. The court resumed, and I took the stand. Karen's lawyer tried to undermine my case with accusations and baseless claims, but I wasn't rattled. I calmly explained the situation, laying out the timeline of events, the fines, the threats. The other neighbors who had been bullied by Karen spoke up too, adding their own testimony. Then came the real kicker. My lawyer had uncovered something that would destroy Karen's entire case. The property management company had no legal standing to issue fines. They had overstepped their bounds and made false accusations. And now, they were about to pay the price for their involvement. By the time the judge delivered the verdict, Karen had been completely defeated. The fines were dismissed, the property management company was held accountable, and Karen was ordered to pay for my legal fees once again. But the best part? The judge even threw in a public apology for the harassment I had endured. I walked out of that courtroom victorious, feeling a sense of satisfaction I had never felt before. Karen had tried to ruin my life, but in the end, it was her own arrogance and greed that had brought her down. She learned the hard way that messing with the wrong person has consequences. And the next time she thinks about trying to push someone around, I hope she remembers this lesson. The next few days after the court victory were strange, almost like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The victory felt sweet, but there was also a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Karen wasn't the type to just disappear. She was bitter, and the kind of person who would never accept defeat without trying to turn the tables. I kept waiting for the next move, knowing it was coming. And sure enough, it didn't take long. One morning, I found a strange letter waiting for me in my mailbox. It was from a lawyer's office, and this one looked far more official than anything Karen had sent before. My heart sank as I opened it. It wasn't just another petty complaint. This time, it was something much more serious. Karen was suing me for defamation, claiming that my accusations had ruined her reputation in the neighborhood. According to her, I had spread lies about her being a bully and a tyrant in the community, and she was demanding a large sum in damages. I couldn't believe it. After everything she had put me through, after how she had tried to destroy my life, now she was playing the victim? The audacity was unreal. But as I read the letter over and over again, something clicked. This wasn't just about her trying to get money from me. It was about control. She was trying to reassert her power in the situation, to show that she still had a grip on the neighborhood and my life. And I couldn't let that happen. I immediately contacted my lawyer, knowing this battle wasn't over. We had to fight this new lawsuit head-on. If Karen thought she could manipulate the situation and get away with it, she had another thing coming. My lawyer advised me to gather as much proof as I could to back up my statements, emails, text messages, statements from neighbors. And that's exactly what I did. I made it my mission to not only defend myself, but to show the world what Karen really was. Weeks passed as the new lawsuit slowly worked its way through the system. The stress was mounting, but I wasn't backing down. If anything, I was more determined than ever to put an end to Karen's reign of terror. Every step of the way, I reminded myself of the countless people who had suffered because of her. Her actions were far from a simple misunderstanding. They were calculated attempts to ruin people's lives, all to satisfy her inflated sense of entitlement. But even as I gathered evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't just attacking me. She was attacking everyone who had ever stood up to her. It wasn't just about a pool or a fine. It was about her losing control over the people around her. The thought fueled my fire as I prepared for the next court date, knowing that the fight was only just beginning. The day before the hearing, I got a call from an unexpected source, one of Karen's former neighbors. They told me they had some important information to share, but they were nervous about getting involved. Apparently, Karen had been involved in several shady dealings over the years, using her position in the HOA to manipulate homeowners into paying for unnecessary repairs, fines, and services. This was the break I had been waiting for. I didn't just have to fight this lawsuit. I now had the chance to expose Karen for who she truly was, a fraud, a bully, and someone who had been exploiting the trust of the entire neighborhood. I wasn't just going to win this case. I was going to make sure everyone knew what Karen had been up to, and make sure that her grip on the community was completely shattered. The next day, I walked into the courtroom more determined than ever. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a fight for justice, and for the truth to finally come to light. Karen was sitting at the other side, her eyes darting around the room nervously as I presented the new evidence. The former neighbor had agreed to testify, and with their statement, we were able to expose Karen's corrupt dealings. The room was silent as the truth came out. Karen had used her position to pressure homeowners into paying for services that weren't needed, and had issued fines and threats to people who didn't comply with her demands. By the time the judge ruled, Karen's entire case had unraveled. Not only did I win the lawsuit, but Karen was ordered to pay restitution to the homeowners she had wronged. The public exposure of her corrupt practices had completely dismantled her credibility in the community. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. She had lost the power she had fought so hard to maintain. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and satisfaction. It wasn't just about winning, it was about justice. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could manipulate and control others without consequence. And now, Karen knew she couldn't get away with it anymore. But even with that victory, I knew the fight wasn't over. Karen might have been defeated in court, but she was still out there, and she wasn't the type to let things go. She would be licking her wounds, plotting her next move. But now I was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about defending my pool anymore. This was about taking back control of my life, and I was ready to fight for it every step of the way. As the days went by, the neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm. Without Karen's influence, things felt lighter. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up about her bullying were now more relaxed, exchanging pleasantries without the usual tension in the air. But even as I enjoyed the newfound peace, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Then it happened. I was at home one evening, just winding down after a long day, when I heard a knock on my door. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I opened it and found a man standing there, holding a package. He was dressed in a suit, with a stern expression. "This is for you," he said, handing me a thick envelope with an official-looking seal. I took the envelope, my heart racing as I wondered what this could be. I quickly closed the door and ripped open the package, pulling out a document that sent a chill down my spine. It was a court summons. Karen was at it again, this time. She had taken things to a whole new level. She was filing a lawsuit against me, claiming that I had defamed her once again. But this time, she wasn't just asking for money. No, this time she was demanding I be publicly humiliated. She wanted me to apologize in front of the entire neighborhood for spreading false rumors about her. I couldn't believe it. After everything she had put me through, she had the audacity to demand an apology? The sheer nerve of her was almost unbelievable. But it wasn't just about the apology. It was about control. Karen had been defeated in court before, and now she was trying to reassert her power over me, to make me bow down and admit I was wrong when I had done nothing but defend myself. I immediately called my lawyer, who was just as shocked as I was. We both knew Karen was desperate. This new lawsuit was an attempt to manipulate the situation, to make herself look like the victim once again. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I gathered my thoughts and started thinking about my next move. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cower. Instead, I decided to take the fight to a bigger stage. If Karen thought she could use the courts to bully me into submission, I was going to show her just how much power the truth could have. My lawyer and I began strategizing. This wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure Karen couldn't hide behind her lies anymore. We gathered testimony from the other neighbors, the ones who had witnessed Karen's abusive behavior over the years. We even had a few who were willing to speak on the record, sharing their stories about how Karen had bullied them and tried to manipulate them into complying with her rules. I knew we had the ammunition we needed to win, but I also knew Karen wasn't going to give up easily. She had shown time and time again that she was willing to fight dirty, and I had no doubt she would keep trying. But this time, I was ready for whatever she threw my way. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with a sense of calm determination. Karen, on the other hand, was sitting at the other side, her eyes filled with the same smug confidence that I had seen before. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could get me to apologize and crawl back into submission. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. The hearing began, and I sat through the back and forth between Karen's lawyer and mine. They tried to paint me as the villain, but I stood firm. I didn't back down when they accused me of slandering Karen. Instead, I calmly presented the evidence of everything she had done to me and the others in the neighborhood. We had the testimony, the documents, and the proof to back up every word. And then, as the session went on, I noticed something. Karen's demeanor was changing. That smug confidence was starting to crack. Her lawyers seemed to be struggling, unable to find a way to counter the evidence we were presenting. It was like the walls she had built up around herself were slowly crumbling. And I knew at that moment that we were winning. Karen tried to interrupt a few times, her voice rising in frustration. But the judge wasn't having it. He had heard enough. After hearing all the evidence, he called for a short recess. And when the hearing resumed, the verdict came down. The judge ruled in my favor once again. Not only was Karen's lawsuit dismissed, but she was also ordered to pay for my legal fees again. I felt a rush of relief as the judge banged his gavel. But it was more than just relief. It was a sense of victory that went beyond the courtroom. Karen had lost, and this time, she couldn't hide behind the legal system anymore. The community saw her for who she really was, and I knew it wouldn't be long before she lost whatever shred of influence she had left. As I left the courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I also knew that this wasn't the end. Karen would always be lurking somewhere in the background, trying to find another way to get what she wanted. But now, I had learned to stand up for myself, and I knew I had the power to keep her at bay. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that I was in control of my own life. And no Karen, no matter how persistent or entitled, was going to take that away from me. After the court victory, the tension in the neighborhood began to settle. The whispers about Karen's underhanded tactics and manipulation slowly faded as the community saw her for what she truly was, a bully who had been exploiting her position for far too long. I spent the next few weeks trying to get back to normal, but every so often, I catch a glimpse of her walking down the street, her eyes cold and calculating, like she was plotting something. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done yet. It was one evening, just as the sun was setting, that I got a strange knock on my door. When I opened it, there was no one there, but a package sat on the doorstep. I looked around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the street was quiet. I picked up the package, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The box was unmarked, no return address, just a plain, nondescript parcel. I felt a chill run down my spine as I carried it inside. The moment I opened it, my heart dropped. Inside was a collection of photos of my house, my backyard, my pool. There were even pictures of me sitting on my patio, completely unaware. I felt a sickening sensation wash over me. This wasn't just a random threat. This was personal. The photos were accompanied by a single note, written in black ink. "You can't escape what's coming. I'm not done with you yet." My hands trembled as I read the note again. My first instinct was to call the police. But something held me back. I knew this was Karen's doing. No one else had a motive to target me like this. But why? After everything that had happened, after her defeats in court, why was she still coming after me? I immediately called my lawyer, and we agreed to take the necessary precautions. My lawyer filed a report with the police, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen was making her move in the shadows, and I needed to stay ahead of her. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though. I started noticing things, small things. A car parked a few houses down that never seemed to leave. The occasional glance from a neighbor who quickly turned away when I looked their way. It felt like the entire neighborhood was on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen. But what could Karen possibly do next? What was her plan? Then one day, as I was working in my yard, a car slowly drove by, and for a split second, I thought I saw Karen behind the wheel. It was only a glimpse, but it sent a rush of adrenaline through me. She was still lurking around, still trying to control things. But why was she being so subtle now? What had changed? I decided I wasn't going to let fear rule my life. I needed to confront this head-on. So, I began taking a different approach. I started recording everything. Every suspicious car, every strange encounter, every moment that felt off. I wasn't going to let Karen have the upper hand again. She had already tried to destroy my life, but I wasn't going to let her do it a second time. It didn't take long for the first real confrontation to come. One afternoon, as I was walking back from the mailbox, I saw Karen standing at the end of my driveway, her posture rigid, her expression filled with contempt. The air between us seemed to crackle with tension, and I couldn't help but wonder how far she was willing to go this time. She stood there for a moment before speaking, her voice cold and almost predatory. "You think you've won, don't you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't over. You've made a mistake, and you're going to regret it." I could feel my pulse quicken, but I wasn't going to back down this time. "I've won more than you think," I said, standing tall and facing her squarely. "And if you think you can intimidate me again, you're wrong." She sneered at me, a flash of fury crossing her face. For a moment, it looked like she might say something else, but instead, she just turned on her heel and walked away, the click of her heels echoing on the pavement. But the unease didn't leave. The feeling that something darker was brewing lingered in the air. The next few days were quiet again, but I could feel the storm brewing. It was like the calm before the hurricane, the kind of quiet that makes you nervous, makes you think something bad is coming. And this time, I had a feeling that Karen was getting desperate. The games she was playing were no longer about rules or lawsuits. They were about something more personal. She was trying to break me, to get me to make a mistake. I couldn't afford to let that happen. I spent every spare moment double-checking my security systems, reviewing the footage from my cameras, and preparing for the worst. Karen had proven she was unpredictable, and I knew better than to let my guard down. Then one evening, it happened. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a loud crash outside. My heart stopped for a moment, and I rushed to the window. There in the dim light, I saw it, my front gate, wide open. The lock had been cut clean off. My blood ran cold. I knew what this meant. Karen had crossed a line. She wasn't just sending threats anymore. She was acting on them. And this time, she wasn't going to get away with it. The air was thick with tension as I stood by the window, staring at the damaged gate. My mind raced, piecing together what had just happened. The lock wasn't just broken. It had been cut cleanly, deliberately. Someone had to have done it, and my gut told me exactly who. Karen was taking her harassment to a whole new level. And this time, she was playing dirty. I couldn't let this slide. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed the police. I knew the importance of documenting everything, of having a record of the escalating behavior. The officer on the other end of the line sounded concerned, but I could tell this wasn't something they could address right away. "We'll send an officer over to take a report, but it might take a while given the circumstances," the officer said. "In the meantime, make sure you don't confront anyone on your property." I didn't need to be told twice. The last thing I wanted was to walk into a confrontation with Karen, especially when she was likely feeling cornered. No, I had to be smarter about this. I had been recording everything up until now, and I would continue doing so. But I also knew that if Karen was willing to break into my yard, the next step might be even more dangerous. I spent the rest of the night walking around my house, checking the locks, securing the windows, and reviewing the footage from the security cameras. Each time I watched the footage, it only confirmed my suspicions. There was no one else who could be behind this. Karen had already proven she was willing to manipulate the system and break every rule to get her way. And now she was turning to physical intimidation. But this time, I wouldn't let her get away with it. The police arrived a few hours later. The officer took a look at the damage and asked if I had any suspects. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," I said, "but I have a pretty strong idea." I showed the officer the footage, and he nodded as he watched the clips. "It's clear that someone's been tampering with your property. We'll file this as a criminal mischief case for now." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It wasn't enough to just file a report. I needed something more concrete. I needed to know how far Karen was willing to go and what her endgame was. She wasn't just trying to harass me. She was trying to break me, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I couldn't let her win. Not now. The next morning, I took a walk around the property, making sure everything was secure. The damage to the gate was just the beginning. I knew Karen would come back for another attempt soon. As I walked past the broken gate, My phone buzzed with a new notification. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat. It was an email from an anonymous source. The subject line simply read, "She's not finished." I clicked on the message, and my eyes scanned the words that followed. The email contained a detailed account of Karen's history in the neighborhood. Everything from her role in manipulating the HOA to reports of her intimidating neighbors into paying fines they didn't owe. But there was more. The email contained something that made my blood run cold. Karen had been talking about me, planning her next move. It was clear now. She was trying to get revenge for everything that had happened. The email ended with a single line. "She's planning something bigger, something you won't expect. Watch your back." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. Karen was playing a dangerous game, and I was caught in the middle of it. I immediately forwarded the email to my lawyer, who promised to look into it. But I knew this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. Karen had crossed a line, and I had no choice but to stay ahead of her. I started organizing everything I had: photos, videos, written statements, the emails, and now this anonymous tip. It was all adding up to something much bigger than I had initially realized. I wasn't just fighting for my peace of mind. I was fighting for my safety. And I was ready to do whatever it took to end this once and for all. Days passed, and each day seemed to bring a new sense of unease. The feeling of being watched never left. I checked the security cameras more frequently, constantly on edge. I had even gone so far as to install additional surveillance systems around the property, just in case. But nothing could have prepared me for the phone call I received late one night. It was my neighbor, Tom, calling in a panic. "You've got to get over here," he said, his voice trembling. "Something's happened to your pool." "It's been—" He cut himself off, his voice full of dread. "It's been destroyed." My heart dropped. I didn't wait for another word. I grabbed my keys, rushed out the door, and sped over to Tom's house. When I arrived, I could see the damage from a distance. My beautiful pool, the place that had brought me peace for so long, was in ruins. The entire structure was collapsed. The tiles were shattered, the water drained, and it looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the sides of the pool. I stood frozen, the reality of it sinking in. Karen had finally done it. She had taken her revenge to the next level, and now my sanctuary was gone. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for everything I had worked so hard to build. I didn't even need to look around to know who was behind this. But now, it was no longer just a matter of suing or defending myself. This had become personal. Karen had crossed a line that I would never forgive. The gloves were off, and I was ready to fight back. Not just in court, but everywhere I had to. I stood there, staring at the wreckage of what was once my pride and joy. The pool, the centerpiece of my backyard, now lay in ruins, a shattered shell of its former self. My heart raced as the realization of what had just happened sank in. Karen had gone too far. This wasn't just some petty act of revenge. This was an attack, an attempt to destroy everything I had worked for. Tom, still shaken, stood next to me, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to do," he said, looking at the mess in disbelief. "I didn't hear anything, just woke up and saw the damage. It had to be someone from around here." I didn't need him to confirm what I already knew. I could feel the fury building inside me, but I knew that I couldn't act impulsively. I had to stay calm, keep my focus. If I let anger drive me, I might lose everything I had fought for. Karen had already cost me enough, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I took a deep breath, looking around the yard. There were no clear signs of how they'd gotten in, no footprints, no tool marks. It was as if the destruction had appeared out of nowhere. But that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to ruin my property. She was trying to send a message. She wanted me to know that no matter what I did, no matter how much I fought back, she was still in control. But what she didn't realize was that her move had only made me more determined to end this once and for all. I called the police, but I knew this wasn't going to be a simple case of vandalism. The destruction of my pool was far too calculated, too personal. The officer who responded took the report and assured me they'd look into it. But I could tell from his tone that he didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about the pool. It was about everything Karen had put me through, everything she'd tried to steal from me. I knew that I couldn't wait for the authorities to act. If I was going to put an end to this once and for all, I needed to take matters into my own hands. I began gathering evidence, again, photos, videos, witness statements from Tom and other neighbors who had seen Karen's behavior over the years. It was time to expose her for what she truly was. The problem was, Karen had always been one step ahead. She knew how to play the game, how to manipulate the system to her advantage. But I wasn't going to let her win again. This time, it was all or nothing. The following week, I spent hours working with my lawyer, preparing for the next step. We gathered all the evidence we had. Everything from the broken gate to the anonymous email warning me about Karen's next move. It was clear now that Karen had been orchestrating this entire campaign of intimidation, using every trick in the book to make me bend to her will. But I was done bending. The plan was simple. We would file a civil lawsuit against Karen for the destruction of my property. But this time, I wouldn't stop at just winning. I would make sure she paid for every penny of damage, every ounce of emotional distress she had caused. I would expose her for the manipulative, vindictive person she was, and I would make sure the entire neighborhood knew exactly who they were dealing with. The day the papers were filed, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. I had made my move. Now it was Karen's turn to respond. But I knew that this time, there would be no escaping the consequences of her actions. No more petty fines, no more threats. She would have to face the reality of what she had done, and it was going to be a reality she couldn't walk away from. I sat back in my office, staring at the stack of legal documents in front of me. This was it, the final chapter in this long, drawn-out battle. I had won before, but this time, I was going to make sure Karen couldn't hurt anyone else again. It was time to take back control. And as for Karen, well, I had a feeling that she was about to learn the hard way that you can't keep pushing people around without paying the price. The neighborhood was mine again, and I was no longer afraid of her. I'd taken back my life, my peace, and my sense of justice. If you've ever faced someone like Karen, someone who thinks they can take control of your life, remember this. Stand up, fight back, and don't let them win. Sometimes, the best weapon you have is the truth. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. If you've had a run-in with a Karen or a similar situation, tell me your story. I'd love to hear it.